The ANC says it has noted court papers that have been filed by its suspended party Secretary General Ace Magashule. In a brief statement issued by its National Spokesperson Pule Mabe, the party says it will communicate its way forward today following the regular meetings of national officials. Magashule had until last week Friday to apologise for writing a letter suspending ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa or face disciplinary action. Through his lawyers, however, he said this would only happen if a court found him guilty of wrongdoing. Now, some commentators believe that this is the buildup to an inevitable split within the ruling party. Associate Professor at the Wits School of Governance, Professor William Gumede, joins us now to chat a little bit about this. Professor, great to have you. Always nice chatting on Morning Live. Welcome.
Yeah, good morning. No, thank you for having me, and good morning to the viewers. I'm always so exciting to speak to you.
So we look at what's happening now. Obviously, we know that there is former President Jacob Zuma appearing in court today. We see the legal woes of Ace Magashule. Now, the move to take the ANC to court, that's really never happened in the ANC at that level of a high-ranking official within the party. What does that mean?
Yes, no, it has never happened. Of course, it's been happening, at a local level, at a provincial level. Really what it means, there's such a divergence of opinion, there's such the views of Ace Magashule and so on versus, Cyril Ramaphosa and his grouping. They're so wide apart that they cannot overcome the differences anymore in the through internal channels. I mean, that is quite significant that, that Ace Magashule now believes that, his difference with the rest of the ANC, or not the rest of the ANC, but let's call it the Cyril Ramaphosa part of the ANC, his differences are so irreconcilable that only the courts can resolve it.
It's quite interesting. I mean, in your opinion piece, you basically talk to the fact that the ANC, we know, has had its problems before. We've seen it play out. But you predict that this current conflict that we are seeing right now is possibly going to be one of the biggest breakups or breakaways that we have seen within the ranks of the ANC. I mean, if we look back at previous tussles, for instance, perhaps we can get your views on this. I mean, we saw what happened when we saw the formation of the PAC, we saw the formation of COPE, then we saw the EFF. So where are we going with this, if I can ask you your views?
I think we're heading for another breakaway. I mean, it's quite interesting. I mean, if you've listened, was it last week with some of the leaked recordings from the ANC National Executive Committee, the former president of the ANC in South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, also in that meeting actually predicted, or rather said that the ANC should prepare itself for a split. So, I think he's correct. We will see, most probably the most significant split of the ANC since it came to power in 1994. We've seen the previous splits. The one significant split, of course, was when former supporters of former President Thabo Mbeki left to form the Congress of the People after Jacob Zuma ousted Ramaphosa. Mbeki as leader of the ANC. Now, that split really, the significance of that split at the time was not all of the supporters of Thabo Mbeki actually left. And Thabo Mbeki himself, who was the spiritual leader of that group, did not leave the ANC and he remains uncomfortably within the ANC. So, so it's almost a split, we can say, from the flanks of the ANC, not from the core, not from the center of the ANC. Then we saw another split thereafter was the economic freedom fighters. Again, it was, from the flanks, not from the center of the party. It was the populist youth wing of the party who left. Some others remained in the party, and the adult youth wing were, led by Thabo Mbeki, the adult populists, led by Jacob Zuma, were in control of the party. And again, so it was not as significant because it was the flank of the party. And then we saw another flank was when the National Union of Metal Workers thereafter, NUMSA, left the ANC. Again, it was a part of the left flank of the ANC, and many of the other rest of COSATU remained, and the Communist Party remained in the ANC. This one, when Ace Magashule and the Jacob Zuma group will leave the ANC, it really will cut the ANC down the middle. It will be the most significant ANC, and then the ANC that we know will never be the same again thereafter.
So, I mean, in your book that you wrote, and it was just before the ANC 2007 Polokwane conference, and I mean, it's been quoted many times, Thabo Mbeki and the Battle of the Soul of the ANC. So we have a look at our former president, Thabo Mbeki. He tried, as you spelled out, to try and force the left and populists out of the ANC. And in this attempt, this really didn't work for him very well. However, there's now a move to try and bring him and his ideals back in and find solutions for the impact of what is going on currently. I mean, if he couldn't do it, now coming back as a former president, where do we find ourselves with these kind of dynamics?
Yeah, the thing is about liberation movements like the ANC, the thing that make them successful becomes a problem when they're in government. So the success of a liberation movement that fights an autocratic government is that, the liberation movement builds broad coalitions that includes communists, Marxists, Leninists, free marketeers, conservatives, African traditionalists, all into one group. And then the liberation movement doesn't come up with a policy because there's only one policy needed, and that is to topple a government that they're fighting for. So you don't need to have the sort of discipline of policies and so on. So that really, if to build such a broad front, make it very, it's very useful to topple an oppressive government. Now, once the party comes to power, you cannot govern with a multitude of policies and ideologies, because when you're in government, you need one set of policies, one set of outlook. So you can't have Marxist, Leninist economic policy and then another free market all into one basket. And that's why most liberation movements, when they finally take power, they cannot come up with policy, or there's paralysis because there's so much infighting, because these groups don't belong together. So what Thabo Mbeki tried to do, and this is now again with hindsight, was to say, to make the ANC an effective party, they can deliver services, they can change the economy, really was to get one set of policies, and it meant to get some of the people that actually naturally don't belong in the ANC out, like populists, get them out, or the far left, get them out of the party, and have a centrist party, an effective modern governing party. He failed to do that because there was so much opposition that people elected Jacob Zuma. Now, I think Ramaphosa doesn't have the choice. The choice is not in his hands to do that. It's almost like the movements, the tide of the break that's supposed to have happened a long time ago is now happening, not in a controlled way, but in a way because of the conflict, and the ANC will have to see what comes after this break.
So interesting what you do say, and your prediction going forward. You basically say that if the Magashule faction loses the current tussle, it's likely that it will form its own populist party, something you've been speaking to for a while, and they could possibly mobilize enough provinces to actually mobilize the provinces and branches to topple Ramaphosa at the upcoming ANC national conference, which of course would likely see Ramaphosa actually being forced out, making the Magashule ANC a purely left party. I mean, this would possibly be a scenario, but how likely is this? I mean, if we look at where we're at right now and the battle against and the populist movement, are we going in that direction? Do you think that's where we could land up?
There are two scenarios, coming from this court case. The one scenario, of course, many ANC members now, actually from both sides, not only from Magashule camp, but also from the Cyril Ramaphosa camp, they are calling for a special conference, or rather to bring the ANC's national conference, which is supposed to happen next year, to bring it forward so they can make a decision about the leadership of the ANC. Now, at such a meeting, one of two things can happen. Firstly, Ramaphosa could consolidate his position and actually win, and actually then, the Ace Magashule populist group of people may then want to leave. Alternatively, the worst case scenario is that the Ace Magashule group could actually mobilize enough branches and provinces and they could actually win. Although I think that's a lesser scenario, I think Ramaphosa most probably now has enough authority and enough support with the ANC to win. And it will be a very, very narrow win, but he will still win. So be it as it may, neither of the two groups can cohabitate within the ANC. One group has to leave. It's like when you're in a relationship, when it is beyond repair, there is no reconciliation possible, and one group has to leave, one party has to leave. So what we will see, in fact, I think we'll have two versions of the ANC at the end of all of that, and neither of those two ANCs, whether it's a Ramaphosa-led ANC or Magashule opposition group, would ever be able to win on their own again. What they will have to do, whether it's a Ramaphosa ANC, they will need a coalition with another opposition party to win the any election, or it would be, if it's a Magashule group, they would also need a coalition to win. So essentially, this is the beginning of the end of the ANC as this dominant party that we know, that we've been knowing since 1994, that controls politics and society. It is the end of it. I think from now onwards, the ANC is unlikely to win the majorities anymore. It will need a coalition.
Very interesting.
Now,
we have to leave it there. I think your views have been well articulated. I wish we had more time to speak, but I think you've given our viewers a lot of food for thought. That's Professor William Gumede. He, of course, is an author. He's a columnist and associate professor at the Wits School of Governance, discussing a likely split within the ANC, Africa's oldest liberation movement, likely to follow in the footsteps of other movements in other African countries that basically lost power and disappeared because of corruption, incompetence and irrelevance to its followers. Very interesting analysis there.